All are equal, just some are more equal than others. George Orwell wrote these famous words in his satirical work, Animal Farm. In this work, Orwell uses something as simple as farm animals to write a scathing review of one of his time's most controversial political philosophies. Orwell spoke of the same idea that Friedrich Engels had called a specter that was haunting Europe. This same idea that led to a 45-year-long diplomatic grudge match between the world's two greatest countries. The same idea that led to countries, regimes that had ruled for a millennia being uprooted by the empowered working class. Communism. Communism itself was one of those controversial ideas of the 19th and 20th centuries, and early on cemented itself as a rival, an adversary to traditional capitalism. The climax of this battleground came in the Cold War, when it was us against them. The great American dream, the great American idea, against the Russian bear. Now you see, the common narrative is that America won the Cold War, that capitalism won the Cold War. What if I told you a slightly different story? What if I told you a tale of a betrayal of everything that America once stood for? What if I told you that in the midst of the worst economic hardship the United States has ever seen, our government turned to a political ideology they can neither understand nor control as a solution? Today I would propose to you that the United States of America has become heavily communistic in nature, and it is this descent that will fundamentally undermine our culture. I want to look at why this is and why that matters. But before I do, let's take a quick look at what communism actually is. Now, up until the dawn of communism, much of the world had been dominated by an economic school of thought known as capitalism. Capitalism was proposed by this economist, Adam Smith, in 1776. As he describes his theory in his book, The Wealth of Nations, little else is requisite but the natural course of things. Now, the American founding fathers loved this idea of small government. George Washington was actually one of capitalism's strongest early proponents when it was first introduced. Other founding fathers, however, like Ben Franklin here, believed that capitalism could be used to address key and specific issues facing America. One he thought of specifically was poverty, though not by helping people cope with poverty, but by driving them out of it by creating economic growth. Let's take a look at how this happens. Let's say that an individual has 10 apples in a capitalistic society. Now we're going to have three different buckets here. We're going to have the individual with his 10 apples. We're going to have the state or the community, the state or the government, and then we're going to have the community. Now in a capitalist government, the government is going to be smaller, and a smaller government is going to take smaller taxes. So they might take, let's say, 1 apple. So this individual has 9 apples remaining, and those 9 apples are his private property. He can do with them whatever he should choose. Let's say he wants to keep 2 of them to, say, feed his family, and wants to take the remaining 7 to the market and sell them. Now he has 2 apples left, but that's not all he has. He also has the profit from the 7 apples that he sold. With this profit, he can buy new apple trees, so that by his next harvest, he can have 15 or maybe even 16 apples. You see, this is how capitalism works. It grows the economy. So when communism was proposed, it came as a bit of a shock. When Karl Marx, pictured here, wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, it was one of the most controversial books that had ever been written, and that hasn't changed. In fact, it made the cut into this book. 10 books that screwed up the world and 5 others that did not help. You see, communism is so controversial because of its ideas. One that it holds higher than any other is the ideal of communal ownership. As Karl Marx described it himself, the entire theory of communism can be summed up in one sentence: abolish all private property. Now, while Karl Marx gets a lot of the credit for establishing this idea, its original conception actually goes back to the 18th century, when French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau proposed the concept in his Social Contract. Now, while communism believes fundamentally in this idea of communal ownership, it also believes in a couple of other things. For instance, the elimination of all institutions of religious and moral influence. As Karl Marx described it himself, the abolition of religion is the demand for the true happiness of the people. Communist states are also marked by heavy state control and a massive number of labor unions and social work programs. Now you see, capitalism used to be as American as, well, apple pie. But what changed all that? A little thing called the Great Depression. You see, when the Depression hit, Americans didn't know what to do. So they turned to liberal progressive Franklin Delano Roosevelt to solve their problems. Now, FDR was heavily influenced by the guy on your right, Rexford Tugwell. Rexford Tugwell went on a journey to the Soviet Union in 1927 and was so impressed with communism he actually played a key role in legitimizing the Soviet Union as a state. But when Tugwell brought back the idea of a state-controlled Leviathan to FDR just couldn't resist. So he passed the New Deal, modeled after the 5 Years Plan, a little thing put together by a guy you might have heard of, Vladimir Lenin. The components of this New Deal might sound familiar to you. Outdate religion and morality by focusing only on progress, establishing social work programs and labor unions across the United States, and massively increasing the government's role in the private sector. As FDR described it himself, there's nothing wrong with communism in this country. This sentiment and the policy groundwork that followed from it has lasted to this very day. In fact, in 1945, a professor of political theory and economics named Cleon Skousen wrote out 45 things, 45 thresholds that he thought the United States would need to meet to descend completely into communism. These goals were analyzed in 2012 in the book The Naked Truth by James C. Bowers. You want to know how many of those 45 goals we've met? 38. 38 out of 45. We are 85% of the way to being a complete communist state. Our job is to stop that last 15%. Because to be honest, this descent to communist ideology scares me for several reasons. But the first is purely economic. If you remember, we were talking about capitalism earlier in terms of apples. So let's compare apples to apples. Let's say that the same individual has the same amount, 10 apples in a communist society. We're going to have the same 3 buckets here, the individual, the state, and the community. Now, just like a smaller government is going to take smaller taxes, a larger government, like a communist government, is going to take larger taxes. So they might take, let's say, 4 apples. Now, this individual has 6 apples remaining. But if you'll remember, those 6 apples aren't his private property. They're the property of the community around him. So let's say that there's 4 other farmers in the area. 4 of his apples go to the community. Now he has 2 apples left. If you remember, the capitalist farmer had 2 apples left as well. But what does that farmer have that this farmer doesn't? The profit from those 7 apples. The profit that allowed this farmer to grow. You see, this is what communism does. It stagnates the economy. Furthermore, the want to abolish religion and morality is a scary thought, at best. A French philosopher, Alexis de Tocqueville, theorized in his work Democracy in America that religion and morality were fundamental pieces to America's cultural tower. It was his theory that our entire way of life, our entire society, could not stand long without them. And as anyone who's ever played the game Jenga can tell you, if you pull out enough fundamental pieces, it's only a matter of time before everything comes crashing down. But you see, this isn't the worst part. No, the worst part is that communist states view people, you and I, everyone in this room, as mere cogs in a machine, mere means to an end. And that's why, in just 3 communist states, the Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, and Cambodia, there have been over 98 million deaths directly attributed to or allowed by the government, more than in both world wars combined. Now you might be saying to yourself, America doesn't do that. America doesn't kill millions of its own people. America doesn't commit mass genocide. Oh, really? Because since I last checked, since 1973, the United States government has allowed, condoned, and funded the systematic elimination of more than 57 million unborn children. You see, this is our legacy. This is our future. Empty bowls, toppled cultural towers, mass infanticide. It's a brave new world. You see, 2016 is a unique year. It's the first time that a socialist running for president has been taken seriously in a long time. It's a year in which you've grown further from our morality, further from what it means to be American. So what can you do about it? Well, fortunately, there's one part of the democratic process that's still alive and well in America. You can vote. But don't vote Democrat or Republican. No, vote on principle. Vote for those who want to keep their noses out of the private sector. Vote for those who believe that religion and morality have a place in American politics. Vote for those who believe each and every human life has value. All we have now is a barn full of pseudo-communist mumbo-jumbo that would even make Orwell concerned. So in the face of this coming darkness, I would encourage each and every one of you, as the old poem goes, to not go gentle into this night, but to rage with everything you have against the dying